Hello, my name is Brittany Smith, and I'm the Director of Education at the Fortune Society. Welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system operates, momentum for change within social justice movements, and the impact these issues have on the lives of everyone that they affect. We ask you, the viewers, to spread the word about both sides of the bars and share your comments about today's episodes with us on Twitter using @TheFortuneSOC. Today's show is titled Land of the Free and Home of the Brave. July is the month that the United States celebrates the signing of the Declaration of Independence, announcing that the 13 colonies at war with Great Britain will regard themselves as independent sovereign states. This historical event led to the formation of the United States and is celebrated as a federal holiday on July 4th. To America, this is an important national holiday and long-standing symbol of patriotism. American flags are honored with night skies filled with fireworks, accompanied by patriotic songs such as the Star Spangled Banner, which brings us to our discussion topic today, a reflection and examination of the final phrase of the Star Spangled Banner, land of the free and home of the brave. Is the United States really the land of the free and home of the brave? The United States criminal justice system holds approximately 2.3 million people in 1,719 state prisons, 109 federal prisons, 1,772 juvenile correctional facilities, 3,163 local jails, and 80 Indian country jails, as well as in military prisons, immigration detention facilities, civil commitment centers, state psychiatric hospitals, and prisons in U.S. territories. There are another 840,000 people on parole and 3.6 million people on probation in the United States. The United States has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. Today, I have the pleasure of discussing these important questions with Cheryl-Lyn Bentley, an associate at Outten Golden LLP. Cheryl-Lyn is a member of the firm's class action practice group representing employees in discrimination, wage and hour, and criminal background check litigation. Before joining the firm, she clerked for the Honorable Chief Judge Patrice B. Tucker of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. Since then, she has exclusively represented employees in employment law matters. Ms. Bentley received her BA from Harvard University and her JD from Yale Law School. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I just want to give a few more kind of discussion points and some things that we can think about as we talk more about this idea of the land of the free and the home of the brave. And that is, if each state in the U.S. were considered an independent country, 23 of the states would be at the top of the list. If we looked at the state with the lowest rate, which is Massachusetts, we would still rank 9th in the world for incarceration. There's a mass incarceration crisis underway in the United States, which we're aware of, and it's been building momentum for decades. With so many people confined, can we really consider ourselves the land of the free at this point in time?
No, I think that's a great question. There's so many people, like you said, who are confined and incarcerated in prison. And not only that, when they come out of prison and they think, okay, we have our freedom now, they are the residual effect of having been incarcerated really weighs them down. They're barred from certain jobs or licenses. They have difficulty finding jobs where there is no legal restriction, for example, and they have difficulty finding housing and just finding a safe place to live. So in that sense, we're not only punishing people one time or basically incarcerating them the first time, but we're continuing that cycle when people leave the justice system.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that, it's something that I see very frequently in the work that I do, and fears that we have around explaining to employers gaps in our resumes or worrying about what the background check is going to say and how we kind of engage in that conversation moving forward. But to add to that, from your perspective, has racial discrimination morphed into discrimination by the legal system as a result of things like a criminal record?
Absolutely. So I'll explain to you. So more and more, we're seeing employers use criminal background checks as a screen for hiring applicants, or sometimes for screening applicants when they're screening employees when they've already been employed. And this is across all industries, retailers, ride shares. It's across, there's so many different industries and companies that are using criminal background checks to screen out applicants. And you know, what we see is, of course, because of the number of, or the disproportionate number of African Americans and Latinos, people of color, who have contact with the criminal justice system, who are incarcerated or who do have a record, they are then subsequently impacted more by this practice of screening out applicants with criminal histories. So in effect, what's happening is that employers are using a criminal background check as a screen, but in effect that's having a disparate impact on African Americans especially and Latinos.
I would add to that from, you know, personal experience. When I was released from prison, I was afraid to even apply to certain jobs in certain industries because I didn't want to have to explain myself. So at times I found it comfortable to, you know, take a retail job because I didn't know what my career outlook would look like. And working at the Fortune Society and with some of our participants, they go into careers or believe that they should take minimum wage jobs because they don't think that there's any potential anywhere else, or they go into only construction fields or fields that they feel like are friendly to individuals who have a felony conviction or a criminal justice background. And it's really unfortunate because how are we discussing rehabilitation and moving forward and people being free and being able to live comfortably, provide for their family, if so many people not only are being discriminated against, but internally believe that they will be discriminated against because of this criminal conviction. So it's really a difficult question to navigate. And for so many of our participants, it's something that we really try to work with them in regards to, because it's so much more, you're there so much more than kind of this criminal conviction. So for an employer to kind of disqualify a person just based on this circumstance really limits the pool of applicants that you have as a result of that.
And that's right. And it's not only just their belief, it's a reality, you know, for so many people. For example, getting licensed or having skills and training. For example, maybe you want to become a barber or a hairstylist or have some skill. A lot of times you'll be barred from obtaining those licenses because of your criminal background. Maybe, you know, you think, oh, I have a shot at a job at a retailer, maybe an entry-level job, but because of your criminal history, which may have nothing to do with the job at issue, the job that you're seeking, employers may screen them out.
And I would add to that, even thinking about career exploration and moving forward and education and how that ties into careers. I recently started Columbia University's MSW program, Master's of Social Work program, and while doing the application for financial aid, the FAFSA form asks if you've been convicted of a crime with drug-related charges, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it really struck me that in applying to kind of advance yourself and further your career, that this is still kind of a part of the conversation. And while Columbia doesn't have it on their actual application, there are still many colleges and universities that ask whether you've been convicted of a felony. To me, it has no relation to my ability to, you know, engage in academic coursework, especially if I know that this will advance my career and give me new career options. So it's kind of disconcerting for me to see that as a formerly incarcerated individual who has a rich educational experience and was just looking to continue along that spectrum.
Right, definitely. That just creates, one, barriers for an individual like yourself who, you know, just want to advance and move forward with your education, provide for yourself and your family, and seek out opportunities. You're coming out of, you know, the criminal justice system and you want to be an active member of society, you know, contributing member of society, and that just makes it more difficult for you. And oftentimes it may act as a deterrent. For example, if you see this question on your application form. In your case, it was for the FAFSA, correct? And then for other people, it may be an application form for a job. And they may be deterred. Maybe, as you said, they think to themselves, you know, they'll never hire me, and so they don't answer the question, or they don't pursue a position there, and therefore, you know, they will continue to have difficult time making ends meet.
And it's really unfortunate that we're not seeing it in one industry. It's not just in employment and it's not in education. We're also seeing it in things like housing, where that is definitely a common part of housing applications, which I also recall from, when I first came home and looking, I had great family support, but wanting to be on your own. And so now I'm working a decent job and I'm preparing this life to go back to school, and kind of the next steps along that spectrum is finding housing, and we find that, similar circumstances are existing in the housing market. And how homelessness and housing instability is a significant factor impacting people with criminal justice involvement. And we are aware of this, and at what point do we kind of consistently make changes? Because it's all tied together when we talk about employment and housing, right? Mm-hmm. I can't necessarily afford housing if I can't get a job that's paying me more than minimum wage. So this discrimination that we're seeing kind of exists in so many realms that we haven't kind of critically analyzed or thought about as much as, well, if I'm struggling with employment and I'm struggling with housing, then how am I supposed to be this productive member of society? And people who are in the movement are very aware of it, but I think it's kind of how we discuss, how we change the conversation about what freedom really means in America. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about kind of that connectedness and the intersectionality of discrimination in employment and how it pervades other aspects of, freedom in our country?
Right. I think this all, leads to higher rates of recidivism, for example. If people can't find a place to rest their head at night, or people can't find jobs to support themselves and their families, in a way that they want to be productive and contributing to society, where else can they turn? What are other alternate approaches for them? I think that it definitely sort of creates additional challenges for people, barriers for people, and it really leaves them very little opportunities to improve their lives and their families' lives.
Yes, as you mentioned, families is just another point that we're thinking about. There are so many children in America where they've experienced one of their parents' incarceration, and we recognize that this leads to negative outcomes in children. So we're looking at that continuum. We're not just looking at what's happening with the individuals, but we're also seeing kind of within the family system and the interruptions that happen within that life. Interruptions to education then kind of become this generational concern, where we don't just have the individuals who are incarcerated and how they're impacted, but we also have how their children are impacted and how family life has changed drastically in the last several decades related to kind of this crisis of mass incarceration. Mm-hmm. So it's just something that, as we continue this discussion and we think about, again, tying back into our topic for today, this idea of freedom, what type of freedoms do families in this situation have, and how are they limited by that? Do you have any thoughts on how this kind of relates to family life?
I think it's destructive to family life. It's destructive to the bonds that people want to build with their families coming out of the system, right? They want to be able to provide for their family, and they can't do that. They want to stay busy during the day, find employment. They can't do that. Or they may not be able to live with their family, right, because of restrictions around, where they may live, because of their criminal histories. So that essentially destroys that family structure. It's hard for people to reconnect with their family in that respect. And I think that a lot of jurisdictions have recognized this, and they've passed fair chance laws or different ordinances across the country, because they recognize that basically punishing people repeatedly because of a mistake in their past or a past wrong is unjust, is unfair, and we need to help people, build people up in all aspects of their life so that they can move forward with their life, and hopefully this is not only just going to impact their lives and make it better for them, but it's going to impact the rest of society when we have people who are working and productive and can contribute to the market. It's a positive contribution to society.
I think that's the biggest concern, and I think problem for individuals who are in this situation where, while incarcerated, you are kind of already experiencing this detachment and this lack of freedom, and you don't have, your family necessarily. You might have support, but they're not there with you. You don't have what you are perceiving when you leave as employment opportunities. And so in this state, what I guess I'm asking is, how do we then change this idea of punishing people twice? Like you said, you go to prison and you lose a lot of your freedoms and your rights. You come home expecting to be a productive member of society. We want you to be a productive member of society, but what steps can, I guess, we take as individuals, as organizations, as movements to kind of stop punishing people twice for the one mistake that they made?
Right, absolutely. So, I think organizations like the Fortune Society have done a really great job of providing very holistic or wraparound services for people after they come out of prison and after they have that criminal justice involvement. So providing services so that they can reconnect with their families and seek employment opportunities, seek housing opportunities. Having those organizations being funded, I think, is a really one big step. I think that the law needs to also move forward, and we've seen some steps made in the different ordinances and different localities having passing different laws to make sure that, for example, questions around your criminal history isn't the first question that is asked when someone applies for a job, for example. So it doesn't serve as a deterrent or a barrier. You judge them based on their qualifications and their ability to perform the job. And I think moving forward, we also have to think about, having more individualized analysis instead of just blanketly grouping people as bad. We don't want them here. Look at the person, look at their qualifications, look at what they bring to the table, and look at the context where they will be. What is the housing situation? What is the employment that they're seeking? How have they showed that they have been rehabilitated and can actually be actively participating and contributing to these different contexts. So I'll give one example. For example, I'm at Outten Golden, and at our firm we work a lot with individuals who seek employment, and they are often screened out because of their criminal background checks. And so in one of our cases, we allege that a large retailer, such as Macy's, have screened out applicants based on their criminal background. And in some cases, they screen out employees, people who've actually started working at the company. They have received various commendations. They've been productive, and there has been no incident. But because they ran a background, or because they later find out that the person had a criminal history, then that person may be disqualified immediately. And that, for example, doesn't make much sense, because this person has been actively participating and actively working and successful, has even been received commendations. So again, that's just an example of how we need to take a closer look and more individualized look at what that person brings to the table, and see them as a whole person before you see their criminal history.
Thank you so much for that, because I agree with you so much. When I first started at the Fortune Society, I started as a teacher, and to me, I struggled with the stigma of having an incarceration record, and I didn't kind of value my own worth. And when I came back to Fortune to be in an environment that was so supportive and so welcoming, it was partly therapeutic for me, but it was also just astounding the number of people that do support you and that do believe in you. And that same feeling that I had then is what we try to reinforce within our participants. Like, we really want them to understand that they're not defined by their worst mistake. And we say frequently to anybody engaging in this conversation with us, would you like to be defined by your worst mistake? And always the answer is no. And so as we look at it on an individual level and we critically analyze and give people opportunities in areas that they didn't expect to have those opportunities, I think it's really important to kind of, like you said, keep pushing forth that model, and let's not think that a person, just because of this incarceration record, is defined by that circumstance. Especially, I can't believe in the case that you were just mentioning, where somebody's already working, you already know that they have great work ethic, you've already supported them and commended them on this work ethic, and then just say you're not worth it, I think really speaks to how devalued people with incarceration records are in America, and it's very unfortunate. And it ties back into this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So at some point, you have lost your liberty due to incarceration, and now as you are released and pursuing the next stages in your life, and you are still kind of limited. And, we briefly touched on conversation around how racial discrimination plays in that. And as we're very aware, there's, statistics that we can cite that kind of discuss the number of the incarceration rate of people that are Black and brown. And it's very unfortunate. The Pager study has demonstrated that a white person without a criminal record with a criminal record is more likely to get a job than a Black person without one.
Right.
So as we talk about discrimination in employment, it's not just kind of one singular factor, but how the race and kind of criminal background play a role. So in terms of how we move forward, I think it's also something about how we change the way we view people with a criminal record in our society. Do you have any thoughts on how we can change the narrative of a formerly incarcerated individual within our society?
Change the narrative of that person?
And I think that you spoke to it to a certain extent, is giving the person the opportunity. But, for me, some of it is how we humanize them, I guess you would say. Okay. We think of people as other in this environment, and we see that this person, they did this and they're a bad person, as you mentioned earlier. But how do we, as a society, then move forward with not seeing these people as other? Like, what is it that we can do, and not just necessarily on an organizational level or as an employer, just as a human being, how we engage with one another?
And I want to also touch on your just comment about the Deva Pager study and race. And I think that it all is interwoven because, as you said, in that study, a white person applying for a job who has a criminal history received an offer for an interview versus more so than a Black person who has no criminal history, right? And I think that goes to, again, race, right? Because here it shows you just the impact of race. It's not just the criminal justice system, it's not the criminal history, the criminal record of this person, the impact of race on people's outcomes. If there's a gap in their on their resume, maybe more likely people, and the person is Black, maybe more likely they attribute that gap to their having been involved in the criminal justice system. I think that it's a question about not only how we deal with people who've been in contact with the criminal justice system, but also how we deal with race in this country, and how those two issues have been interwoven to disadvantage people of color.
I think we can see a lot in society today with, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, and looking at the Netflix documentary 13th about how pervasive the problem is between race and the criminal justice system. And you touched on a number of other points, including the gap within on your resume, or viewing a resume and noticing that some of these jobs might be in a town or in a place where we have prisons. And so those are some of the additional barriers than just saying, oh, I might have a criminal history, that I can screen you out without ever doing a background check. Another area that we kind of haven't really touched on is credit checks and how that is impacted by by incarceration or by lack of employment. And for me personally, while I was incarcerated, I had a credit card before going to prison. And when I came home, and I actually tried to meet with the credit card company and speak to them about, like, how would I move forward in holding off payments, or how, because I knew I was going to prison, and what the next steps were. So when I came home, I had terrible credit. And it was, a workaround to learn how to do that, to learn how to fix my credit, to then apply for housing, like I mentioned earlier. And so there were just so many things that I personally felt like were stacked against me, and it was really, really difficult. And so I've always been grateful for places like the Fortune Society that kind of try to change, or try to support, or do support individuals. I shouldn't even say try, because we do support individuals that are struggling with re-entering society. So when we talk about kind of what our next steps are as a society, I think that in addition to the critical analysis that you were talking about, looking at the individual level of what's happening with an individual, is how are we discussing numerous policy changes that don't necessarily say, you know, well, this is a concern for a person that is involved in the criminal justice system, but this is a concern that kind of involves everybody in American society. How do you move forward kind of within that environment?
Right, and I'm glad you brought up the credit issue, because that not only will impact your ability, for example, to get credit in the future or to get housing, or even sometimes employers run these credit checks on you as well. It just impacts so many aspects of your life that it just seems like the cards are stacked against a person with criminal history.
So for me, I guess some of my final thoughts on, is America truly the land of the brave and the home of the free? I personally feel at times that as a Black woman with a criminal background, that there are so many circumstances where I don't feel free, where I feel like I'm continuing to fight against bars that are being set around me. And, you know, I know it's a personal struggle that I have. I've encountered it with people that I work with. But I also recognize that we have the opportunity to make changes. And even that kind of has become a slight concern in terms of disenfranchisement of individuals with felony convictions. There are a number of states that don't allow you to vote based on your conviction. There are a number of states that restrict it while you're on probation and parole. And so that's another area that I think that if we're talking about how we make changes, is something to think about as we move forward.
Definitely.
So we're about to close up. Do you have any wrapping thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience today?
I just thank you for sharing your story to just really display or demonstrate how just having that criminal history may have nothing to do with you as a person, your qualifications, and you as an excellent employee and just an excellent individual who can move forward, but the barriers that you face coming out of prison, it really helps to demonstrate how difficult it is for people, even with someone like you who is such an inspiration.
Thank you so much for that, Cheryl-Lyn. Well, unfortunately, our time is coming to a close. Thank you for an extremely thoughtful discussion. To our national audience, especially people watching from behind the walls, I hope this inspires you to research efforts aimed at organizing to reform the legal system and collateral consequences designed to further oppress communities. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please visit us at our website, fortunesociety.org, or on Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. This is Brittany Smith, and I appreciate you joining us as we critically look at both sides of the bars.